Hello, my name is Peter Parfitt and welcome to Newbrick Workshop. It's time to do a bit of maintenance on the dust extractors. Now, it's really important not to keep putting this off. It's something that needs to be done reasonably regularly to keep them running efficiently. Now, let me first of all apologise. The first few minutes of this video, the sound isn't very good, but I tried my best to correct it. Now, I'm going to start with my pneumatic NVD 750, which I bought from Axminster. It must be over 25 years ago. And it's been going brilliantly ever since I bought it. Now, the reason I bought this in the first place is that you can put a 4-inch hose onto it, 100mm hose onto it, or a smaller diameter hose. And there are two inlets into the unit. And with the 4-inch inlet, it's got just about enough suck to deal with my planing machine, despite it saying in the planing machine instructions that you need a far bigger unit. This does a jolly good job. However, its drum, where the detritus would normally go, is pretty limited, and so that's why I've got the Cyclone interceptor here. And the way this is set up is very simple. The inlet to the extractor is here, and this hose goes to the top of this Cyclone. Now, this Cyclone came from Axminster. It's made of metal. Therefore, there's no need to have a pressure relief valve, which I used to have in my old setup. And this sits on top of a drop box. In this case, it's an ordinary plastic dustbin, and it's not got a proper seal. It's just got a piece of MDF into which I've cut a channel, which is the same diameter as the lip on the dustbin. And it sits down very nicely. So this is effectively the outlet from the Cyclone. Its inlet is here, and this then would be connected to my planing machine, which is here, like so. And that works perfectly well, even with the NVD 750. Now, on this side of things, there's really no maintenance required, apart from, of course, emptying the drop box from time to time. Now, I do have to watch that the drop box doesn't become completely full, because when it does, the chippings continue to be sucked up, but this time they get sucked up through this pipe and then into the extractor. We don't want that because we want to keep the extractor free from chippings. That way, the extractor filter, which I'll show you shortly, will last for at least a year. Now, when I'm doing the sort of maintenance I'm going to be doing on the extractors, I always wear some form of respiratory protection, and this is my go-to machine from Trend. It's absolutely brilliant. It's easy to put on and off. The battery lasts 8 hours, and it is so simple. And there's no long inlet hose going down to a motor unit, which used to get hooked on things like the fence on my tracksaw cutting station and things like that. So this is a good bit of kit. Anyway, I'm going to not wear this quite as often as I would do so that you can hear what I'm saying. And I always start, before I take the machine apart in any way, by just cleaning off the dust which is on the outside, because the process of opening it up can cause dust that's settled on the outside to go into the atmosphere. That'll do for now, and then I'm going to remove this. Now, in the past, when I've been a bit careless and allowed the drop box to overfill, I've taken this hose off and the chippings would fall out of here. Well, thank goodness it's not happened this time. I've now got my respirator on, and I'm going to now open up the machine. Take a look. First thing is to inspect here to make sure that this hasn't, for some unknown reason, become covered in dust and detritus. It's not. It's absolutely perfectly clean. I'm just going to pop this down very carefully. That's the motor unit. And inside here I've got the secondary filter, and I'm just going to very carefully lift this up. And there it is, again, perfectly clean. Now, if you look at this filter bag which is here, now ordinarily at this stage, after a year, this would be brown from chipping. Well, it's not. If I very carefully do this, you can see now the build-up of dust here on the bag, and that's the sort of thing that starts the bag to get clogged, and therefore the extractor become inefficient. So we're going to swap this out. And what I've got here is a plastic bag. I'm going to very carefully put it into the plastic bag. So I'm just going to loosely tie it off because I can put more in this at a later stage. Now, if you look inside here, you can see there are just a few chippings at the bottom. These are the ones which, for some reason, decide they're going to go all the way through the whole system and bypass the Cyclone. Well, never mind. And you can also see a build-up of dust around this edge here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use my Festool extractor to clean this bin on the inside. And I hope you can see now that's pretty clean. There's a little bit of staining, but that's not dust, that's just stain that's gone into the paintwork a bit. So that's good. Now we've got to get a new filter bag. Now the normal HEPA filter bag for the NVD 750 looks like this. It's quite large and it has an opening here which would go on to the smaller sort of 50mm or whatever size it is inlet into the extractor. But because we're using the 100mm or 4-inch inlet, there's a different way of doing the bag. And what you do is you cut the bag off here, leaving an open bag down to here. So there's that inlet valve, and I'm going to cut straight across here. And we would throw this away, or you can use it for all sorts of things. If you're doing a bit of brass polishing or whatever, you can keep this and use it for those odd times when you want to cloth it, which you then have to throw away. And it's a very simple case of opening the bag up, like so, putting it down inside here, and then have a little turnover around the edge. And that's then the primary filter, effectively. The dust is coming in through here and would be caught on the inside there and not go up into the main filter. So I now put the secondary filter back in place like so. Make sure I'm seated properly and make sure that my bag is caught all the way around. And then I can take the motor unit and put it back on. Now, because this is circular, you can have this going in any direction you like. Now, this is the exhaust outlet from the motor, and I like to have that facing away, so I have it in that position there. But that's completely optional, you have that wherever you want it. So that's it. That's the NVD 750 annual maintenance done. And now the NVD 750 is back in its usual place, right out of the way up there. Workshop space a bit limited, that's why. And we're now going to move on to the Festool extractors. And the first Festool extractor is going to be the CT6, and after that I'm going to do my CT26. Now I've had the CT26 since my very first Festool purchase. I bought it from Axminster, I think it was in 2010, and it's never had a problem. Fingers crossed. Now my CT6 gets quite a bit of abuse. I use it for all of the really difficult dirty jobs, and my wife uses it quite a bit as well. For example, if I'm drilling anything in walls, concrete or masonry, I use this to suck up the dust. If I'm doing any repair of plaster work, well, I'll use a sander. Again, I use this machine. So it's always getting fine dust, dirty, awful stuff. And on top of that, if we've got a problem outside, maybe some dirt and cobwebs and stuff by the front door, this will be used. So the first thing I'm going to do before I open it up is to clean the body of it in here. And it's really important to do that because otherwise there's a chance you'll start getting more dirt inside the gubbins. You want to reduce that as much as possible. That's that. Now we're going to open it up. And the first thing I'm going to do is to remove the hose, which goes in here. And I've undone this little clip here, which means I can now move this bit out of the way. If you notice here, there's a hole here for the lead to pass through. Now, over the years, the lead going through this hole has been chafed a little bit, so I've protected it, and I'll show you how I went about that shortly. And that's moved off to one side, and now I can open up the main body of the machine. I'm just going to remove that out of the way, and you'll see now, here we've got the dust bag, virtually full, and then under here is the main filter. You need to pull this tab here, and that allows a little closing mechanism to go over here, so there's less likelihood of any dust coming out of the bag and going into your lungs. And you may be able to see that there's a little bit of discoloration to this bag. I think I changed this one maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks ago, something like that. It's been used a reasonable amount since then. So this I'm going to dispose of, and now I'm going to open up this element here, which now gives us access to the main filter. And today I'm going to change the main filter. But before I do that, again, I'm going to take my hose from my CT26. I'm just going to clear out this area here. Now, the main filter sits at the end of this little box in which the dust bag fits. And it's only held in by sort of gravity or whatever. And there it is. Now, this is the original filter, which has been in this machine for, I'm not sure quite how long now, 4 or 5 years, 4 years probably, something like that. So I'm carefully removing that. Now, ordinarily, one ought to be using masks when you handle filters like this in case there's fine dust, and there may be some contamination there that you don't want to breathe in. The new filter comes in a box like this. Incidentally, I did a search on the internet, and the place that I found they were the least expensive was from Bunny's Bolts, and I'll tell you a little story about Bunny's Bolts shortly. And the new filter just goes in like this. There's some little lugs at the edges here. You just push that in so it's within those lugs, and that's the main filter changed. And you can then pop it back in like so, and that clips in. Now, the CT-SYS filter bags come in a box of 5, and I think I've got just 2 left now. And again, incidentally, Bunny's Bolts were the cheapest for these. I have ordered more. And if you look carefully, there's a notch there, and that's going to go on this side. And what you want to do is just gently ease the bag down in, like so. Tuck this end of the cardboard under the 2 lugs there, and then push that end down, and that's it. So that's the new bag in. And now all we need to do now is to close this up, and I can then replace the box that goes on top, and carefully clip that in place, and I'm just going to tidy up this wire. Now, I mentioned this business here, and I'll just explain what I did. Now, I didn't realize I had a problem until it started to show. Had I realized before I ever started using the machine, I would have done this at the very beginning. Now, this is spiral wrap, and you can buy it cheap as chips on eBay. That's where I get mine from. And this you can wrap round cable. And once you start it off, you can then encourage it to go around the cable like so. And if you're careful, you can use even thin stuff. I think this is either 5 or 6 millimeter. You can use it on pretty thick cables as long as you wrap it around carefully, and it will then form an outer protection layer. Then on top of that, I use some self-amalgamating tape. So the whole thing's held there. That's made this a lot stronger, and it still fits in to the receptacle as designed by Mr. Festal. So there we go, that's now in there, and the awkward bit was actually here, and that's now protected. And then the final thing to do is to reintroduce its hose, like so, and if you wanted to, you could now test the machine. So that's the CT-SYS. Now, as an aside, whilst we're talking about spiral wrap, I've got here a double socket, but I've got 3 things that I routinely plug in. I've got my NVD 750 extractor, I've got my drill, which is here, and I've got my planing machine. So what I've done is I've used some larger diameter spiral wrap. I think this is a 10 millimeter, and I've wrapped it around these 2 cables and then incorporated the 3rd one. So when I decide I need to take one out and put another in, they're all held together and I don't have to search around on the floor or whatever for them. So that's nice and convenient, and it's also very tidy. And now let's move on to the CT26. Now I should explain, on top I have here the Oneida Ultimate Dust Deputy. That is a Cyclone which intercepts dust, puts it into a drop box here. I've done a video about this a long time ago, and I'm not going to talk about that now. So I'm going to remove this and then continue to talk about the CT26. I'm going to adopt the same process that I did with CT-Sys, but this time I'm going to use the CT-Sys to do the cleanup of the CT26. But before I do that, let me just point out this cable. This cable plugs into the auto socket of the CT26, and it goes to this distribution panel here, and it provides the power to this panel. And in here I've got a plug which goes to my capex. Here is one for either my sander or track saw, whichever I'm using, and I've got a socket here I'd use for a CMS, and I've got a second track saw location which is in the other side of the workshop, so that I can have any one of those tools plugged in and switched on at a time. And I have a routine that when I switch the power on for a tool, I then make sure I swap its hose over so it's connected to the CT26. When I finish with the tool, I switch it off, and then when I start with the next tool, same process, switch the power on for whatever tool it is and make sure the correct hose is plugged into the CT26. So that's that panel there. Having done that cleanup, we're going to now remove the motor unit. There's a clip on this side, a clip on the other side. Just release it like so, and then you can lift off the motor unit. Now the bag here has been in the machine for quite a long time, and I hope you can probably see that it's quite discoloured. Now the reason for that is twofold. First of all, I've had this bag in here a very long time. Because I've got that Ultimate Dust Deputy, most of the detritus doesn't go in here, and therefore it's only the very fine dust which gets caught, and it's discoloured the bag. And the other thing is, if I'm doing anything away from the workshop where I need something which is a bit more powerful than the CT-Sys, I will then use this machine. So therefore its bag is getting some stuff in there. So I'm now going to remove the bag, and again ordinarily I'd put on a respirator for this. I've now closed that off, and that is about a year's worth of using the Dust Deputy and using it for odd jobs away from the workshop. And now, just as before, I'm going to use this machine, the CT-Sys, to do a cleanup under here. Now again, I'm going to change the main filter on this, and it's very simple. I'll just move that out of the way a bit. You just pull this out here, and out comes the main filter like so. This main filter has been in this machine since it was new, and you really ought to be changing these probably every year, every 2 years, depending on usage. And very similar to the way we did it with the CT-Sys, we just pull the old filter out. You really ought to be wearing a face mask for this, and I'm going to dispose of this in my black bag. I'm just going to give this a little vacuum around here, and then I'm going to put the new filter in. And just as before, it fits in very easily, and I can now fit this back into the machine. And again, the bags for the CT26 are sold in boxes of 5, and this is the last one from this box. I've also bought some from Bunny's Bolts. If you look carefully at this part here, there's a little section here which sticks down, and that's going to go down into a little recess which is below the intake here. So I'm going to just push this in like so, put it over the spigot, and that's that fitted. And I'm just going to tuck this bag in neatly. It's important that you don't trap any part of the bag anywhere around here, which is where the motor unit fixes on to the bottom receptacle. So you've got to make sure that's tucked in out of the way. And then we're just going to lift the motor unit back on, and then clip, clip, and that's the machine ready to go. Now, I said I'd mention Bunny's Bolts again. It's really important that I do, because I would never have started making videos if it weren't for Warren at Bunny's Bolts. About 11 or 12 years ago, I needed to borrow a Domino 700. I was making a new bench, and it needed something pretty solid in its construction. And Warren allowed me to borrow one, and he didn't charge me for it. He was so kind and generous. I said, well, look, I'll tell you what I'll do. I will write a woodworking article about it and mention Bunny's Bolts. And the other thing I did was made my first video. And that's how it all started. So Warren, if you're watching, Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for watching this video. Take care. Many thanks. Bye-bye.